What's the wrong way to give my startup team equity? Dividing up the equity between you and your team should be a relatively straightforward process. However, I've seen too many startup CEOs make the same mistakes over and over again. And some of these mistakes can make it really hard for your startups. I don't want that to happen to you. Based on my experience dividing up the equity in my company and helping too many startup CEOs fix the mistakes they've made, I'm going to share with you the 10 most likely mistakes you'll make dividing up your equity. I hope you like it. Hi, I'm Brett. On my channel, I help early stage startup CEOs like you raise money and grow your startup. So if this sounds like you, then hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get notified every time I release a new video. Let's get started. And let's start with the most important one on my list. Number one, your equity doesn't vest over time. Imagine this scenario. You've divided the equity between you and your co-founder in a 50-50 split. Then, your co-founder quits 3 months after you start. So, unless you have a vesting period for the stock, your co-founder that just left the company now owns 50% of your company. Of all the self-inflicted wounds you can give yourself, not having the equity you give, especially to you and your co-founder, vest over time is the biggest one of all. The reason this is such a big issue is that over 50% of founder relationships fail. The answer to this is you should have your equity vest over time. Ideally, you would have a 4-year vesting period with a 1-year cliff. The cliff means that 1/4 of the equity will vest after 1 year. So if your co-founder leaves in that first year, you don't have a bunch of dead equity sitting on your cap table. If you've made this mistake, I would try and correct it immediately by redoing the agreements with a vesting period. Next, let's move to number 2 on our list. Number 2, you don't refresh stock options. Let's say you add some great talent to your team and you give them an initial 4-year stock option grants that are very generous. That's great. However, what happens after the 4 years are complete? Obviously, the financial incentive to stick around goes down unless you grant them more stock options. Yes, you and your investors will be diluted when you refresh employee stock options. However, employee retention will be really high. I saw this play out at 2 companies I worked at in the same industry. The first company, Maxim Integrated Products, had a policy of refreshing employee stock options every year with market rate grants. The second company, Micrel, didn't have a policy of generously refreshing employee stock options. The results were that the average Maxim employee stayed at Maxim for over 10 years. And the average Micrel employee stayed at Micrel for just 4 years. Next, let's move to number 3 on our list. Number 3. You give too much equity or too little equity for the same role. I was meeting with one of my investors, Raul, and I was updating him on hiring a new executive. He asked me how much equity I was planning on giving the new person. I told him and he responded, "You need to be fair to John." John was another person in a similar role. Raul is right. Here's what he was driving at. Your team, whether you like it or not, is going to share information about how much they make and how many stock options you give them. This is normal. So, if you give wildly different amounts of stock options for the same role, Your team is going to find out. Obviously, the person who gets the lower amount is going to be rightfully pissed. The solution here is being consistent and fair. We had a tight range regarding the equity we would give for any position, and if the range shifted upwards, then we would increase the grants through refreshing of the people we'd already hired. Yes, there will always be some employees who feel that they've been wronged, but this will reduce that amount and increase employee retention dramatically. Next, let's move to number 4 on our list. Number 4, you set the strike price for your equity too high. I was attending the first board meeting of a startup I was advising when one of the investors who was on the board said, "We should set the strike price for the stock options really high. That way, the employees that leave will not want to buy the stock and we won't be diluted." Isn't that nice? I shook my head in disagreement and I said, "I agree with you that we will be diluted less if the strike price is higher. However, I think we'll hurt the company and our ability to recruit top talent by doing this. Everybody knows everybody. They, the ex-employees, are going to talk. Why not turn them into ambassadors that will be more likely to say good things about us?" My point was that competition is fierce for recruiting great people. And the journey to a liquidation event is long, sometimes 10 years or more. Not everyone is going to stick around for the whole ride. Why not have these people as much on your side as possible? Next, let's move to number 5 on our list. Number 5, you tie the equity to meeting specific milestones, a la slicing pie. You may have heard of an equity distribution methodology created by a professor called slicing pie. The idea is that you give employees equity based on the value of their contributions. This is instead of the traditional method of equity vesting over time. The problem I have with the slicing pie methodology is that it's extremely arbitrary in terms of the distribution of equity. Plus, you can have employees that do great work, then through no fault of their own, not 100% complete a goal and get nothing. That's why I prefer the traditional time-based methodology of equity distribution. It's what investors expect. And if you have an employee that isn't performing, then you terminate the employee so the equity distribution becomes fair. Next, let's move to number 6 on our list. Number 6, failing to implement a repurchase agreement. Without a mechanism to buy back unvested shares when someone leaves, you risk having long gone employees, usually co-founders, still holding a significant stake in the company, which can create cap table headaches. For example, let's say you have a co-founder that originally had a 20% stake in your company. The co-founder left after 2 years. So if you implemented reverse vesting, as you should have, then the co-founder would have 10% ownership, not counting for any dilution. But what about the other 10% of your co-founder's stock? Typically, this is handled in a repurchase agreement when you buy back the stock at a very low price, like 0.01 cents per share. So the stock is required essentially for free. Next, let's move to number 7 on our list. Number 7, giving employees too short a window to exercise their options. Many of your very early stage employees are not going to be around for the whole 10-year plus journey of your company to a liquidity event. The question is, how long should you give an employee that leaves to execute their stock options. Many startups give employees only 90 days to exercise stock options after they leave. This often forces them to either pay a significant amount of out-of-pocket, including potential tax liabilities, or walk away from their equity entirely. The argument here is similar to the point I was making in number 4 on our list. You can take the attitude that you don't care because your employee is leaving the company. However, I believe this is short-sighted. Extending the post-termination exercise window can make your options more valuable and help with retention. Think long-term. Next, let's move to number 8 on our list. Number 8. Not setting aside an equity pool for future hires. The only way your startup is going to scale is if you are able to continually hire top talent. This means you'll have to regularly ask your board of directors to increase your stock option pool. The classic mistake I see too many CEOs make is they either don't allocate equity for future employees or they don't understand how much equity they need. You'll likely need to have a stock option pool of around 10% per year. The way to figure this out is develop a hiring plan for the next 24 months. Then allocate equity for each position you intend to add to the team. The sum over 12 months and 24 months will give you a good idea of how much equity to ask your board for. And don't forget to add in the amount of equity you'll need to retain employees too. That means refreshing. As long as you are grounded in the facts, your board should be supportive of what you need. Next, let's move to number 9 on my list. Number 9, providing broad-based acceleration without understanding its impact. Accelerating stock vesting when a company is acquired is a great idea for founders, but it's not a great idea for employees. Here's why. Founders take a much greater risk than employees when they start a company. So it's only fair when there's an acquisition that the founders have more leverage in a negotiation with a potential acquirer. Having their shares vest immediately upon an acquisition gives them this leverage. However, while acceleration clauses can be valuable for founders, applying them broadly across employees can reduce your company's value in an acquisition. If all the employees' equity vests immediately upon acquisition, the buyer loses a key retention tool which can lead to a lower purchase price for you. Remember, a key part of the value in any acquisition is the talent. So if the talent has no incentive to stay at an acquiring company, it significantly hurts and reduces the value of your company. Next, let's move to the last one on the list, number 10 on our list. Number 10, having too narrow a definition of cause for terminating a co-founder. I've saved the most important one for last. I know you're going to disagree with what I'm saying, but having a narrow definition of cause combined with an acceleration of equity on termination can destroy your startup. Let me explain why this is a real issue for you, the CEO, and your investors. You guys will be on the same side. Let's say, like in the last example, you have an accelerated vesting clause for your equity and your co-founder's equity. And let's say you have to fire one of your co-founders shortly after you started, like I had to do. If the definition of cause for termination is very narrow, then all of the equity of your co-founder will accelerate and it will hurt the viability of your company because there'll be all this debt equity on the books. However, if the definition of cause is broad, as it was for us, then your co-founder's equity will not accelerate. It's a big deal. Now, if this content is resonating with you, then please hit the like button right now. One final thought. Equity management is complicated. I strongly recommend you get some expert support. Ideally, I would suggest you hire an experienced startup lawyer to help. However, lawyers are expensive, so the lower cost alternative, if you are just starting out, is a service like Gust.com. Gust will help you incorporate, and it will help you develop a clean, structured way to handle equity. Or you can use a service like Carta.com if you're moving towards a Series A investment. Now, I have two more things for you today. First, my free startup pitch deck template. It has all the slides you need to develop an awesome pitch deck. Click the link below this video to get yours for free. Second, join my free group of startup CEOs, Zero to Pitch. It's a community for startup CEOs focused on growing their companies and raising funding for their companies. Click the link below to join. Finally, click the subscribe button to get notified every time I release a new video. I'm Brett at brettjfox.com. Thanks for watching today. Take care. Bye.